The day I noticed it, the light in the kitchen was different. It was a Sunday morning, the kind my son liked to call slow mornings. The air was heavy with the smell of coffee and cinnamon toast, and the radio murmured something old and soft. The children were laughing in the living room, building a fort out of cushions and blankets, and my daughter-in-law, Claire, was standing by the sink, humming to herself as she rinsed a cup. It was an ordinary scene, the kind that should have filled me with quiet contentment. But something in the air felt wrong. I couldn't have told you what it was then. It was just a small shift, like the faint chill that comes before a storm. I watched her as she turned slightly, her hair falling over her shoulder. She smiled when she saw me, polite and practiced. She had that kind of smile that never quite reached her eyes, though I used to think I was imagining it. Maybe I wanted to. My son adored her after all. She made him laugh. She made him eat better. She made him settled. And wasn't that all a mother ever wanted? To see her child happy, even if that happiness came wrapped in someone else's design? But that morning, as the light slid through the window and painted her face, I saw something else, a flicker of unease, a quiet, guilty stillness in her movements. I didn't have a name for it then. I only felt the weight of it pressing against my chest. She handed me a cup of coffee and said, "Here you go, Margaret. Extra cream, no sugar." Her voice was smooth, almost too gentle. I took it, smiled, and thanked her as though everything was perfectly fine. And for a moment, I almost convinced myself it was. The children, Liam and Grace, burst into the kitchen, faces flushed with energy. Liam was 6, Grace 4. They were both beautiful, in that ordinary, innocent way children are. But that morning, when Liam ran up to me, I noticed it again. The pause. The small, sharp intake of breath that stopped behind my ribs. Liam's eyes. They weren't his father's. It wasn't the color. They were hazel, and my son's were brown, but something else. The shape, the intensity. I had seen that gaze somewhere else before, though I couldn't quite place it yet. It was like standing on the edge of a memory that refused to show itself fully. I brushed the thought aside. Children don't always look like their parents. That's what I told myself. Genes play tricks. Resemblance skips generations. My husband had been fair, with eyes lighter than mine. Maybe that was it. Maybe I was just seeing ghosts of the past. But ghosts have a way of insisting on being seen. That night, after everyone had gone to bed, I sat in the guest room, the one they'd given me after my husband passed, and stared at the family photo on the dresser. My son, beaming with his arm around Claire, the children in front of them, smiling without care. They looked perfect. They looked like every picture that was ever meant to say, "We are whole." Yet the longer I stared, the less whole it looked. There was a faint unease in my chest that no amount of reason could soften. I tried to sleep. I couldn't. Every creak of the house, every gust of wind outside, felt like something whispering to me. Something I wasn't ready to hear. The next few weeks, I tried to shake it off. I busied myself with the children, school pickups, snack times, story hours. Claire had gone back to work, so I was the one who stayed with them during the day. She said she trusted me completely. "You're such a blessing, Margaret," she'd say. I'd smile, but inside, something in me had started to turn over, restless and searching. One afternoon, I took Liam to a swimming lesson. He loved the water, said it made him feel like a superhero. He splashed and kicked, laughing, and I found myself smiling for real. But when his instructor, Mr. Davis, came over to compliment him, something in me stilled again. Mr. Davis had the same eyes, the same smile. It was a strange thought, too sharp and sudden to be real. I tried to laugh it off, but when he bent down to adjust Liam's floaties and Liam looked up at him, something in the symmetry of that exchange made my breath falter. The way they both squinted when they smiled, the way their brows arched in the same exact shape. I felt dizzy. I excused myself to the bench, pretending to check my phone, but my hands were trembling. I told myself I was being cruel to even think it, that this was what loneliness did. It made you suspicious, made you imagine things that weren't there. But the thought lodged itself in me like a seed, and over the days that followed, it began to sprout. Every small interaction between Claire and Mr. Davis began to replay in my mind. The way she greeted him that first day, too bright, too casual. The way she laughed when he made a joke about Liam being unnatural. I had thought nothing of it then. I had even teased her later, saying, "He's quite handsome for a swimming instructor, isn't he?" She'd laughed and rolled her eyes. But now, remembering it, her laughter felt tight, rehearsed, a little too eager to end the subject. That night, I couldn't stop the images from colliding. His eyes, her laugh, Liam's face. I told myself to stop. I told myself it was dangerous to even think it. But once a mother's instinct wakes, it doesn't go back to sleep. A week later, I offered to pick Liam up alone. Claire said she had errands, seemed grateful. I sat on the bench again, pretending to read. Mr. Davis was in the pool, laughing with the kids. When Liam jumped into his arms, I saw it again, clear as day. The mirror of a man in a boy. The same cheekbones, the same faint dimple that appeared when they grinned. The world tilted slightly. The laughter around me dimmed. All I could hear was the slow, steady beat of my heart in my ears. When Claire arrived, late and breathless, she smiled at me and thanked me for waiting. Mr. Davis waved from the poolside. She waved back, her smile flickering for just a second too long. And in that flicker, I knew. I knew with the kind of certainty that burns quietly, deeply, without permission. That night, I sat in my room again, staring at the photo on the dresser. The children looked different now. I wanted to unsee it, but the truth had already unfolded in front of me. I didn't know what to do with it, didn't know what it made me. A mother? A betrayer? A silent accomplice? My son came home late that evening. He looked tired, happy, kissed Claire on the cheek, lifted Grace into his arms. I watched him and felt something break softly inside me. I could hear the sincerity in his laughter, the love that blinded him to everything I now saw too clearly. He was a good man, always had been. Too good, maybe, too trusting. And she, well, I had never been certain what she wanted. Stability, perhaps, a man who would adore her, who would keep her anchored, and she had found that in him. But the truth, whatever it was, didn't fit neatly into that arrangement anymore. For the first time, I wished I had never noticed, that I had stayed in ignorance where everything looked whole. But once you've seen the crack, the whole wall begins to tremble. The days that followed were quiet, though not in the way peace is quiet. It was the quiet of tension held beneath the surface, the kind that hums low and constant, like a wire about to snap. I tried to go about things as if nothing had changed, as if my thoughts hadn't turned poisonous, but every glance, every small sound seemed amplified by what I now knew, or thought I knew. Claire had no idea, of course. She moved through the house as she always did, efficient, composed, gracious in all the ways people admire, but rarely trust. She was never unkind to me, but there was a coldness to her politeness, a practiced restraint that made me feel more like a guest than family. My son never saw it. He only saw her smile, the warmth she turned on like light whenever he walked in the room. I found myself watching her more than I should. Not out of anger, not yet, but out of fascination. I wanted to see if I could catch the lie somewhere in her movements, in the small tremor of a hand, the flicker of guilt in her eyes. But she gave me nothing. She was good, so good at pretending, too good. Once, while she was folding laundry, I noticed her stop for a moment, holding one of Liam's shirts to her chest. It was such a soft, human gesture that it disarmed me. For a second, I wondered if maybe I was wrong. Maybe all of it was my imagination. Maybe grief had warped me. Losing my husband had hollowed me out in ways I didn't fully understand. Maybe I was just projecting suspicion where there was none. But then she looked up and saw me standing at the doorway. Her face changed, not with guilt exactly, but with something sharper, like being caught mid-thought. "Oh," she said lightly, folding the shirt quickly. "You scared me." "I didn't mean to," I said. "I was just coming to see if you needed help." No, I'm fine," she replied, smiling that polished smile again. "I've got it." And that was all. Just a small, unimportant exchange. But it left me uneasy, because behind that smile, I saw calculation, an awareness that she was being watched. That awareness is what truly frightened me. It meant she knew there was something to hide. That night, I dreamt of my husband. He was standing at the edge of a lake, his back turned. The water was calm, silver under a pale sky. I called his name, but he didn't turn around. When I woke, the house was silent. The air smelled faintly of rain, and the clock read 4:12 a.m. I lay there in the dark, my heart heavy with things unsaid. In the morning, Claire asked if I could watch the children again. She had a work meeting, she said. I nodded, of course. The children were the only part of this house that still felt innocent. Liam hugged me tightly, and Grace climbed into my lap with her little book about animals. "Grandma, look," she said, pointing to the lions. "They're a family." I smiled. "They are, sweetheart." "They stay together forever," she added proudly. Her words caught in my throat. I could only nod. Later that afternoon, while the children napped, I walked into the kitchen to make tea. My hands moved without thought. Kettle, mug, tea bag. But my eyes wandered to the counter where Claire had left her handbag. It wasn't something I would ever touch. I was raised to believe that respect and boundaries were sacred things. But I couldn't stop looking at it. That black leather bag seemed to hum with secrets, sitting there like an unopened letter you're not supposed to read but can't ignore. I told myself I wouldn't. I even turned away, poured the boiling water over the tea bag. But then I heard the faint buzz of her phone inside the bag. A message alert. I froze. It could have been anyone. Probably was. A friend, a colleague. But the sound was enough to make my pulse stutter. The kettle's whistle still echoed faintly in my ears. Before I could stop myself, I found my hand reaching toward the bag. I didn't open it. I just looked. The phone screen had lit up through the small opening at the top, bright against the shadow. I saw one name, Ryan Davis. I felt my stomach drop. I couldn't breathe for a moment. I knew that name. I stepped back from the bag as though it had burned me. My hands trembled, and I pressed them to my chest, willing myself to stay calm. It could be innocent. That's what I told myself over and over. Maybe it was about the swimming lessons. Maybe it was nothing. But the timing of it, the secrecy, it was too cruel a coincidence. When Claire came home later, she was cheerful, too cheerful. She thanked me, kissed the children on the head, and started talking about dinner plans. I nodded along, pretending to listen, but my mind was somewhere else entirely. I could hear her laughter and see her lips move, but her words no longer reached me. All I could think about was that name glowing on her phone. Ryan Davis. That night, I sat on the porch with a glass of water and stared out at the dark. The city hummed faintly beyond the garden, distant but alive. Somewhere in those sounds were the lives of strangers, people who had no idea how easy it was for the world they trusted to crumble. My son came out to join me. He leaned on the railing, smiling the same gentle smile he'd had since he was a boy. "You all right, Mom?" "Yes," I said. "Just couldn't sleep." He nodded, looking toward the yard. "You've been so good with the kids. I don't know what we'd do without you." I swallowed hard. "They're wonderful children," I said softly. He smiled again, oblivious. His trust in me, in her, in all of it, it was pure. And I realized then that this was the cruelest part of truth. Once you see it, you can't share it without breaking something that can't be mended. For days, I wrestled with it. I thought about telling him. I rehearsed it in my head. "There's something you need to know, sweetheart." But every time I imagined his face, the confusion, the disbelief, the hurt, I couldn't do it. I couldn't be the one to destroy the only happiness he had ever truly built. One evening, Claire asked if I could stay with the children again. She said she and my son were going out for dinner, just the two of them. I agreed, though I could feel a heaviness growing inside me that wouldn't lift. When they left, I watched their car pull away, my son's hand resting on her knee. They looked, from a distance, like the perfect couple again. It made me ache. After the children were asleep, I wandered into the kitchen to tidy up. A stack of mail sat on the counter. I wasn't snooping, not at first. I was just moving things around, making space. But among the bills and flyers was an envelope, half open, addressed to Claire Davis. For a second, the room seemed to tilt. I picked it up. The letterhead read, Riverside Swim Academy. Her maiden name wasn't Davis. It had never been Davis. And yet there it was, bold and unmistakable. My hands began to shake. She had used that name for something. Why? I put the letter down, carefully, exactly where it had been. My breath came shallow, fast. I wanted to scream, to cry, to confront her right then and there. But what good would it do? My son was out, laughing over wine with the woman who had built her life on lies. The children were asleep upstairs, dreaming in peace, oblivious to the fragile threads holding their world together. I went to bed that night with my heart pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. I dreamt again of my husband, but this time he turned to face me. His eyes were sad, as though he already knew what I'd done, or what I hadn't done. In the morning, when I saw Claire, she was radiant. My son kissed her forehead before heading to work. She made pancakes for the children, humming the same old tune. She looked content, victorious even. And I looked at her and thought, how long can you live with a lie like that? The answer, it seemed, was indefinitely, if no one ever calls it by its name. That evening, when everyone had gone to bed, I took the family photo from the dresser again. I stared at it under the soft yellow light. My son's hand rested on Liam's shoulder. Grace leaned against her mother. They looked like the picture of love, but I could see it now. The small betrayals hidden in the details. The faint line between truth and performance. The fragile scaffolding of a family built on deceit. I held the photo until my hand ached, then placed it face down on the table. For the first time since learning the truth, I wept. Not out of anger, but out of the quiet, suffocating grief of someone who has lost something irreplaceable, but cannot tell anyone that it's gone. The lie became a third presence in the house. It moved through the rooms, soft-footed and invisible, brushing against curtains, sitting between us at breakfast, standing by the doorway while I watched the children play. It breathed when I breathed. It waited when I waited. I could feel it learning me, my rhythms, my doubts, the edges of my restraint. I had thought that knowing the truth would give me power. Instead, it hollowed me out. It was not fire, but fog, thick and heavy, clinging to everything I touched. Each morning, I told myself I would speak, that I would tell my son the truth and free myself from the weight of it. But then he'd walk into the kitchen, hair still damp from his shower, tie half done, smiling that boyish smile that had carried him through every heartbreak since he was 16. "Morning, Mom," he'd say, kissing my cheek. "You sleep okay?" And I'd feel it again, that unbearable tenderness that made silence seem kinder than truth. The children were thriving, oblivious. Liam started school that autumn. On the first day, I walked with them to the gates. He looked so proud in his little uniform, his backpack slightly too big for him. Claire took photos, adjusting his collar, laughing softly. For a moment, she looked like every mother at the gate, nervous, excited, fiercely protective. Watching her then, I felt something I hadn't expected. Pity. Whatever else she'd done, she loved those children. I could see it in the way she touched them, in the way her voice softened when she spoke to them. The love wasn't false. It was just built on stolen ground. That night, I couldn't sleep again. I sat at the window, the one that looked out over the garden, and thought about the last real conversation I'd had with my husband. It was 2 months before he died. We'd been sitting outside, watching the dusk swallow the light. He'd said, "The hardest part of getting old isn't the body, it's keeping quiet while the world changes around you." I hadn't understood it then. I do now. The world around me had changed. I was still in it, but not part of it. The secret built a wall between me and everyone I loved. I couldn't tell my son because it would destroy him. I couldn't tell Claire because it would expose her. And I couldn't tell anyone else because it wasn't my story to tell. So I carried it, alone. Weeks passed like that. Me moving through the house like a ghost, holding the family together with one hand and holding the truth shut with the other. One afternoon, I took Grace to the park. The leaves were turning, copper and gold, drifting down onto the path. She ran ahead, laughing, her curls catching the sunlight. A man was there, near the swings, helping his son onto one. I didn't recognize him at first, but when he turned, I felt the air leave my lungs. It was him. Ryan Davis. He hadn't seen me. I froze where I stood, the stroller still in my hands. Grace called, "Grandma, push me." But her voice sounded far away, muffled under the rush of blood in my ears. Ryan was tall, well-kept, with a kind of casual charm that made sense of everything. He had the same soft brown curls as Liam, the same dimple that appeared when he smiled. God help me, once I saw it, I couldn't unsee it. He lifted his own child, boy or girl, I couldn't tell, and laughed. His laugh carried across the playground. It wasn't cruel. It wasn't guilty. Just ordinary. Human. That's what broke me most. He didn't look like a villain. He looked like someone who lived easily while I was being suffocated by a truth that wasn't even mine to bear. Grace tugged my sleeve. "Grandma," she said, "why are you sad?" I knelt beside her, hiding my trembling hands in hers. "I'm not sad, sweetheart," I lied. "Just tired." She frowned. "Mommy says when you're tired, you need hugs." I smiled weakly. "Your mommy's right." She wrapped her arms around my neck, warm and small and trusting, and I thought, she has no idea. None of them do. That night, when I told Claire about the park, she didn't flinch. She didn't even look up from slicing the vegetables. "Oh, Ryan's son goes there," she said casually. "We ran into them before." Her voice was so smooth it chilled me. Not a trace of panic. Not even a pause. I wanted to ask her, how do you live like this? How do you wake up and look at him, at them, knowing what you've done? But I didn't, because she would have lied. And I was too tired to listen to another lie. Later, after everyone went to bed, I walked into the children's room. They were both asleep, faces relaxed, small hands curled against their pillows. I sat down beside them and watched the slow rise and fall of their chests. I thought about what would happen if the truth ever came out. How they would look at my son, the man who raised them, and realize he wasn't theirs by blood. How they would look at her and see betrayal. How they would look at me and see silence, because silence, too, is a choice. I whispered into the dark, "I'm sorry," though I wasn't sure who I was speaking to, my husband, my son, the children, or myself. The days began to blend together after that. My son was busy with work. Claire had her routines. I kept the house running. It was a kind of quiet survival. But something in Claire shifted just slightly. She started watching me, small glances when she thought I wasn't looking. The first few times, I ignored it. But one evening, as I cleared the table, she said softly, "You've been distracted lately?" I froze. "Just tired," I said. She nodded, smiling, but her eyes stayed on mine. "It's important we all stay steady, you know?" For the children. There was an edge in her tone, subtle but unmistakable, a warning disguised as kindness. She knew I knew. For a long moment, we just stood there, two women bound by the same secret, facing each other across a gulf neither of us could cross without destroying everything. Finally, she said, "You've always been such a help to us. We're lucky to have you." I nodded. "Of course." Then she added softly, "And I hope we'll continue to trust each other." The words were light, but they landed like a blade. That night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling. I thought about what my husband would have said if he were here. He'd tell me to do what's right, even if it hurts. But sometimes, right and ruin are the same thing. The next morning, I wrote a letter. I didn't know who it was for. Perhaps for my son, perhaps for no one. I wrote everything, every suspicion, every sign, every truth I'd pieced together. When I finished, I sealed it in an envelope and placed it in my dresser drawer. A confession for when I no longer had the strength to speak. Outside, rain began to fall, soft and relentless. The kind that soaks the earth quietly, without thunder or spectacle. I stood by the window and watched it blur the garden into watercolor shapes. I thought about my life, about the decades of loving, losing, forgiving. I'd learned that most of the world's cruelty wasn't loud. It was quiet. It wore a smile. It sat across from you at dinner and said thank you for the salt. And yet, even knowing all that, I couldn't hate her. I wanted to, but I couldn't. Because deep down, I understood her. She was a woman who had made one catastrophic choice and built an entire life on it. A woman terrified of losing what she loved. And perhaps that was the cruelest truth of all. We were more alike than either of us wanted to admit. Winter came slowly, settling over the town like a heavy quilt. The mornings were pale and cold, and the days slipped by almost soundlessly. The house felt smaller then, quieter. My son was working longer hours, and Claire spent most afternoons driving the children to activities or hosting playdates. I stayed behind, keeping things warm, making meals that waited on the stove long after everyone was gone. I told myself I was waiting for something, the right time, the right sign, the right word that would tell me what to do. But no such thing ever came. The truth, I think, has its own sense of time. It sits still until it decides to move. Sometimes I'd catch sight of the photo on the mantel, the one from their wedding. My son looked so proud, so full of hope. Claire, radiant and sure, They didn't know then what kind of future they were building. None of us did. I remember thinking that night as I watched them dance, I hope she keeps him happy. That was all I ever wanted, for him to be loved the way he deserved. Now I'm not sure if he's ever really been loved at all. He started looking tired around the eyes. He'd rub his temples at dinner, smile less, talk less. Once, when Claire was upstairs with the children, I asked him if everything was all right. He hesitated, then said, "I don't know, Mom. Sometimes I feel like something's missing, but I can't name it." I wanted to tell him then. The words rose up in my throat, trembling and sharp. But I couldn't. I looked at him, my only child, and I thought, once you speak, there's no taking it back. The next day, Claire handed me a folded note before leaving for errands. Her handwriting was careful, almost delicate. Inside, she'd written, "Thank you for all you do for us. I know things have felt tense. Let's keep the peace. For the kids." There was nothing more. No name, no signature. Just those few lines that said everything she couldn't say out loud. She wanted my silence, and I gave it to her. Not because I was afraid of her, but because I was afraid of what would happen if I stopped being silent. You see, truth isn't clean. It doesn't heal neatly. It breaks, it burns, it ruins. And sometimes, it doesn't set you free. It just changes the kind of prison you live in. One afternoon, I was folding laundry in the living room when Grace came running in, holding a crumpled drawing. "Grandma, look, it's my family," she said. I took it from her hands, a stick figure house with 4 smiling faces, hers, Liam's, her mother's, and her father's. The father's hair was the same bright yellow she always used for her dad, my son. But the smile she'd drawn looked more like Ryan's, wide, dimpled, carefree. I don't think she even noticed. That night, I lay in bed thinking about the drawing, about what we passed down to our children. Not just our faces, but our secrets, our silences, our half-truths that grow roots in the dark. Maybe one day they'll know. Maybe not. Maybe by the time the truth surfaces, it will no longer matter. I've stopped pretending I can control what happens next. Instead, I've started writing again. I fill the pages of an old leather journal I found in the attic. I write about the days before the lie, about my son's childhood, about the house we built together when he was young. I write about the way love changes, how it stretches, breaks, reforms, how it sometimes means holding your tongue when every part of you wants to scream. Sometimes, when I'm writing, I imagine my husband sitting across from me, listening quietly like he used to. He'd never tell me what to do. He'd just sit there, patient and steady, as if the answer would find me when it was ready. A few weeks ago, Claire came into my room unexpectedly. She saw the journal on the desk and picked it up. "What's this?" she asked, half smiling, half suspicious. "Just stories," I said. "Memories." She set it down, brushing her hair from her face. "I used to write," she said softly, "before the kids." Something flickered in her eyes. Not guilt exactly, but exhaustion. Maybe regret. For a moment, We were two women standing in the same small space, both tired, both trapped in the choices we'd made. I thought, she's not my enemy. She's just someone who's lost her way. When she left, I looked at the journal again. I'd filled almost half of it by then. I turned to a blank page and wrote, "The truth doesn't disappear when you bury it. It waits. It waits for light." I don't know if anyone will ever read those pages. Maybe my son will find them one day, long after I'm gone. Maybe he'll finally understand, or maybe he won't. Maybe he'll think it was just the ramblings of an old woman with too much time and too many thoughts. But at least the truth will exist somewhere, even if it's only in ink. The first snow fell a few days later. The children ran outside, shouting, chasing flakes with open hands. My son came out too, laughing, catching Grace in his arms. For a moment, everything looked perfect again. The kind of image people frame and hang on walls. I stood by the window, watching them, my heart both full and broken. I realized then that love is not about purity or certainty. It's about endurance. It's about staying, even when the staying hurts. The snow kept falling, soft and soundless. I could hear Claire's voice calling from the porch, telling them to come inside before they froze. And as I watched my son look back at her, smiling, I thought, maybe this is enough. Maybe not every truth needs to be told in this lifetime. Maybe some truths are meant to live quietly, carried by the people who can bear them. When I turned from the window, the light caught the edge of the journal on my desk. I reached out, placed my hand on it, and whispered, "It's safe. For now." Then I closed it. The snow kept falling. The house was warm, and the secret, like the winter, settled in. Patient, unspoken, endless,